The sun dipped low over the Texas horizon, casting long shadows across the dry earth of the Crawford Ranch. It was late summer, and the annual livestock auction drew a crowd of denim-clad ranchers, worn boots crunching the dirt as they lined the wooden fences. Laughter echoed under the orange sky. But that laughter dimmed when a horse stepped into the center of the ring. Not just any horse, but a massive draft stallion with a chestnut coat, a long, tangled mane, and a bold white stripe down his face. He was heavy, too heavy, and everyone noticed. The murmurs began like wind through grass, soft at first. Then came the jeers. "Well, damn," someone chuckled from the back. "Did someone roll him here instead of lead him?" More laughter followed, mostly from a group of 6 men leaning against the rails. Leland Cole, a longtime rancher with a loud voice and louder belt buckle, shook his head. "Bet he eats more than my ex-wife," he barked, and the others howled. The horse stood still, head slightly lowered. His name was Maverick. His breath was heavy, his sides rising and falling under the weight of years and ridicule. He didn't rear or resist. He simply stood, as if he had done this before. As if he'd been stared at, laughed at, measured and dismissed. The auctioneer tried to regain control. Lot number 27. Belgian Cross, 8 years old. Strong. Works well. Just a bit on the heavier side. It didn't help. A banana peel had been tossed in earlier, now stomped near Maverick's hoof, and someone whispered, "He probably brought that himself." In the far corner, a woman watched quietly. Martha Briggs, 68, was the type of woman who didn't raise her voice unless she meant it. Widowed, tough, and known for rescuing more animals than she could afford, she stood beside her old friend, Eli Turner, arms crossed. But it wasn't Eli who moved this time. It was the third figure next to her, her brother, Leland's twin, the quiet one. His name was Leland Briggs, and unlike his loud brother, he didn't laugh. Leland Briggs stepped forward, slow and steady, locking eyes with the horse. There was something there, a flicker in Maverick's tired gaze, something almost human. He didn't see a joke. He saw a mirror. The crowd quieted for a beat as Leland adjusted his hat and stepped right into the ring. And that was the moment everything started to change. The crowd stirred, confused by Leland Briggs stepping into the ring. He wasn't a man known for dramatics. Most of the town thought of him as the quiet Briggs, always in the shadow of his louder twin brother. But there he was, boots sinking slightly into the dirt, walking toward the massive horse with a kind of reverence, the kind you'd reserve for an old friend. His eyes never left Maverick's, and Maverick didn't flinch. From the fence line, Martha narrowed her eyes, sensing something more than impulse. She knew Leland better than anyone. He didn't do anything without thinking it through. And yet, this moment didn't feel planned. It felt personal. Even Eli, who had come only to scout for a strong workhorse for his struggling field, found himself leaning in, drawn by a silence that had overtaken the arena like a storm just before the first crack of thunder. Leland stopped just a few feet from Maverick. The air was still. The men who'd laughed earlier now stood quieter, unsure what was happening. Leland reached up slowly, letting the back of his hand brush against the horse's thick neck. The coarse hair met his weathered skin, and for a second Maverick closed his eyes. No flinch, no fear, just stillness, as if he'd been waiting for this exact hand. From behind, Randy Cole scoffed loudly. "What's the matter, Leland? Finally found someone your own size." Laughter returned, though less enthusiastic. Some of the men exchanged glances. Not everyone was comfortable mocking a man in a moment like that. But Leland didn't answer. He just kept his hand on the horse, his jaw clenched, eyes soft. Maverick shifted his weight, letting out a breath that kicked up dust. Something cracked open in Leland's memory. A long-forgotten field, the sound of hooves from decades ago, and a father who used to say, "You don't choose the right horse by its weight. You choose it by its heart." Leland hadn't thought about his father in years. Hadn't wanted to. But suddenly, the words echoed like they had just been spoken. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Opening bid? Anyone? And then Leland did something no one expected. He turned his head just enough to speak. 500, he said. A murmur ran through the crowd. Too much. For that horse. People thought he'd lost his mind. But Leland didn't care. Maverick had already chosen him, and somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't just a horse. It was something else. The sale closed with the crack of a gavel and a single bid. $500. No counter offers. No second guesses. The crowd didn't clap, they just stared. As Leland led Maverick out of the ring by the worn rope, a ripple of quiet conversations followed him like dust in his footsteps. To most of them, he was now the fool who bought a joke. A heavy, useless beast. But Leland didn't flinch. His mind was far from the noise. Back at the loading pens, a few men lingered, watching him secure Maverick onto the trailer he'd borrowed from Eli. Randy Cole passed by with a half-smirk, chewing a toothpick like it was part of his personality. Hell, Leland. Didn't know you were collecting lost causes. What's next? Rescuing armadillos with limp legs. The others laughed again, but it was thinner now, more forced. Leland didn't look up. Didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He just adjusted the ramp, stepped aside, and gave Maverick a gentle pat on the shoulder. The horse stepped in without resistance. Inside the truck, Martha turned slightly to glance at her brother. You gonna tell me what that was about? Leland paused, hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. I don't know, he said finally. Just something in his eyes. Like he's been carrying something no one else sees. Martha didn't push. She knew grief when she heard it hiding between words. The drive back to the farm was quiet. Sunset rolled over the hills like spilled fire, and Maverick shifted once in the trailer, as if to remind them he was still there. At a red light in the next town over, a teenager in a passing truck pointed at the trailer and laughed. Damn, that's a big one, he shouted. Leland didn't turn his head. But Martha did. Her glare shut the kid up before the light turned green. When they finally arrived at the farm, Leland opened the gate and led Maverick down the ramp. The horse stepped carefully, sniffing the earth like he didn't quite trust it yet. The old barn stood quiet in the fading light, a little broken, a little tired. Like both of them. Leland watched as Maverick walked toward the corner of the paddock and stopped. The horse turned his head back slightly, eyes meeting his again. Still no fear. No anger. Just patience. It was the same look June had given him, all those years ago, the night before she passed. The next morning came heavy with silence. No birdsong, just the creak of old barn wood and the whisper of wind sliding through broken slats. Leland stood on the porch with a cup of black coffee, staring out at the paddock where Maverick stood, unmoving, like a statue built from sorrow. The sun had barely cleared the treetops, but the horse was already watching him. Head raised, eyes steady. It was like waking up to judgment, or maybe understanding. The farm hadn't seen life like this in years. Since June passed, Leland had let it slip into something less than it once was. The fields grew wild with stubborn weeds, the fences sagged, and the barn leaned like a tired old man. He had fed the cattle, mended the gate, done what had to be done, but not more. Never more. Maverick, just by being there, disrupted the quiet resignation that had taken hold. He walked out slowly, boots crunching frost-tinged grass, and stopped a few feet from the fence. Maverick didn't move. Leland leaned on the post and studied him. You and me, he muttered, voice dry. We're both too heavy for what the world expects us to be. There was no response, of course, but somehow the moment felt shared, as if the horse, massive and silent, understood more than he should. By mid-morning, Word had spread through town. Leland Briggs had bought that fat horse from the auction. The jokes came easy. At the diner, someone left a slice of banana cream pie at his usual table, with a sticky note, "For your new pet." At the gas station, a teenage boy shouted "Moo!" as Leland filled his truck. He ignored them all. But each jab echoed. Not because he believed them, but because they reminded him how quickly people forget what kindness looks like. Martha visited that afternoon, bringing oats and a few bales of hay. She didn't say much, just leaned against the gate and watched Maverick with folded arms. "He doesn't move much," she said softly. "He will," Leland replied. "He just needs time." She looked at her brother. "You both do." That night, as the sky melted into dark velvet, Leland sat on the porch again, the same chipped mug in his hands. Maverick was lying down now, legs folded beneath him, eyes half closed but still facing the house. Leland's gaze drifted to the barn, then to the field, and finally to the sky, where one bright star blinked alone. He whispered, "I'm trying June." And somewhere, in the quiet between stars and breath, something inside him cracked open, just a little. 3 days later, Leland heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up from the barn. A silver truck pulled into the driveway, unfamiliar at first glance, until the door swung open and Dylan stepped out. His son, 36 years old, same jawline, same fire in the eyes. They hadn't spoken face-to-face in nearly 2 years. Not since June's funeral. Not since Dylan said things no son should, and Leland answered with silence that hurt just as deeply. "Got your message," Dylan said, stuffing his hands in his jacket pockets. "Didn't think you'd ever ask for help again." "I didn't," Leland replied. "Your aunt did." Martha appeared from the porch, arms crossed. Someone had to. The tension between father and son hung in the air like storm clouds. Dylan glanced at the paddock and raised an eyebrow. "So this is the legend?" he asked, nodding toward Maverick. The horse stood a little straighter, sensing the shift in energy. "Name's Maverick," Leland said. "He looks broken," Dylan muttered. Leland turned to him slowly. "So did your mother. Didn't stop her from being the strongest thing I ever knew." They spent the afternoon in half-spoken conversations, fixing the barn door, checking the water troughs, avoiding the things that mattered most. But Maverick watched them both with eyes that missed nothing. Late in the day, as Leland brushed the horse's thick coat, Dylan approached slowly. "You really think this horse is worth it?" Leland paused, the brush in mid-air. "It's not about worth. It's about choosing something when nobody else will." That night, Dylan sat beside his father on the porch for the first time in years. The stars above them blinked faintly. "Mom would have loved him," Dylan said after a long silence. "She would have understood him," Leland answered. "Better than I do." There was pain in those words, the kind that only surfaces when men run out of ways to avoid it. In the barn, Maverick lay down again, but this time closer to the edge of the paddock, almost as if trying to be near them. Dylan noticed. "He stays close to the house." "He doesn't like being alone," Leland said quietly. "Neither did Mom," Dylan replied. And then he added something softer. "Neither do I." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, healing. And far in the distance, under the watch of a million silent stars, Maverick blinked, and for the first time, let out a soft, low whinny that broke the night wide open. The next morning, before the sun had fully lifted the fog, Leland found himself in the barn, sitting on an overturned feed bucket with Maverick just a few feet away. The horse chewed slowly, eyes half closed, trusting. The warmth of the animal's breath filled the cool air, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Leland began to speak. Not to Maverick, not exactly, but out loud, into the stillness. "She used to hum in the kitchen," he said quietly. "Every morning. Same tune. Never knew the name of it, but I'd hear it before the coffee even finished brewing. Maverick didn't move. Leland swallowed hard. When she got sick, the humming stopped. That's when I knew. Before the doctor even told us. That silence, it was louder than anything. Behind him, Dylan stood in the doorway, arms folded. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something about his father's voice, stripped of pride, stripped of armor, made him stay. This wasn't the man who'd raised him with calloused hands and quiet expectations. This was someone raw, human. I blamed you, Dylan said, stepping forward. Back then. For not being softer with her. For not fighting harder when she got worse. Leland didn't turn. You weren't wrong. I just didn't know how. There was no apology. No long explanation. Just the truth, simple and unvarnished. And somehow, that was enough. They spent the rest of the day working side by side in quiet rhythm. Fixing fence posts, cleaning stalls, sanding old wood. And through it all, Maverick followed them at a distance, as if his presence alone was stitching something invisible back together. When they paused for lunch, Dylan looked across the field and said, "You know he's not just a horse, right?" Leland gave a faint smile. "No, he's not." It was hard to explain what Maverick had become. A symbol, maybe. A second chance that didn't speak, just stood there and waited. Waited for men too proud to grieve, too stubborn to change, to finally remember who they were before life hardened them. That evening, as the sky turned from gold to deep blue, Dylan took a photo of Maverick grazing near the fence line. "You should show people this," he said. "Not the jokes. Not the weight. This." Leland looked at the image on the phone. "For the first time in years," he nodded. "Maybe it's time they see what I see." And just behind them, Maverick raised his head, as if he knew they were finally ready to listen. The photo Dylan took spread faster than either of them expected. By the end of the week, it had been shared dozens of times in local Facebook groups, passed between phones at the diner, and even printed in the county paper with the caption, "The Gentle Giant of Briggs Farm." The image showed Maverick under soft evening light, grazing peacefully, his massive frame framed by a halo of gold. But more than that, people noticed the look in his eyes, calm, steady, almost wise. At first, the comments were cautious. "Didn't know that horse could stand at all. Guess there's more to him than meets the eye." Then they became curious. A few neighbors stopped by the fence, pretending they were just passing through. Kids wanted to pet him. Someone left a bag of apples on the gate. Leland watched all of it unfold from the porch, arms crossed, unsure how to feel. He hadn't asked for attention. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding from it. One afternoon, as Leland and Dylan worked on patching a fence post, a familiar truck pulled in. The door slammed with that smug confidence only one man in town carried, Randy Cole. Same hat, same loud walk. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt and looked around like he owned the land. "Well, look who's become the hero," he smirked. "Even fat horses get redemption arcs these days, huh?" Leland stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You didn't drive out here just to hear yourself talk. What do you want?" Randy shrugged. "Word is, folks are interested in seeing the big guy. Maybe some kids from the school. Fair's coming up. Could make a little money. Thought maybe you'd want in. Give him a real job." It wasn't about kindness. It was business. Randy never saw value unless there was profit in it. Dylan stepped forward, but Leland held up a hand. "He has a job already," Leland said firmly. "Teaching us how to be better men." Randy laughed, but it didn't last. He looked around once more, then muttered, "Don't get too attached. Folks love to build things up just so they can tear 'em back down." And with that, he left, dust swirling in his wake. That night, Maverick refused to lie down. He paced the paddock, ears twitching at every sound. Something had shifted in the wind, something not yet seen, but definitely felt. And Leland, sitting on the porch with his second cup of coffee, felt it too. The storm rolled in without warning. Not a storm of thunder or rain, but one of cruelty. Just after midnight, Leland was stirred from sleep by the frantic sound of hooves pounding against dirt. He threw on his boots and rushed outside, heart pounding, flashlight in hand. The beam swept across the paddock, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Maverick was bleeding. Shallow cuts along his side, rope burns across his neck. The gate had been forced open. Splintered wood lay scattered across the ground, and muddy tire tracks led out through the field. Leland dropped to his knees beside the horse, hands shaking. Maverick was still standing, breathing heavy, trembling, but alive. Dylan appeared moments later, eyes wide with panic. What the hell happened? Leland's jaw clenched. Somebody tried to drag him out. Who would do that? The answer didn't need to be spoken. They both knew. Not everyone in town liked what Maverick had come to represent. Not everyone appreciated seeing weakness turn into strength. The sheriff came out the next morning, took photos, wrote a report, shook his head and said all the right things. But justice was slow in these parts, and Leland knew better than to wait for it. Martha showed up with bandages and antiseptic. She didn't speak much, but her hands were steady as she cleaned the wounds. Dylan held the horse's halter, whispering soft words like a child might whisper to an injured parent. "He didn't fight back," Dylan said quietly. "He could have kicked the fence down, crushed someone. But he just stood there." Leland nodded. "That's what strength looks like." News of the attack spread fast. This time, the town didn't laugh. They brought feed, clean hay, and quiet apologies. Someone painted a new sign and hung it on the fence. "You mess with one, you answer to all." And while Leland appreciated the gesture, he knew something had changed forever. That night, as Maverick lay under the stars, stitched and bandaged but still watching the house, Leland sat beside him in the dirt. No porch, no distance. Just man and horse, shoulder to shoulder. He placed a hand on Maverick's thick neck and whispered, "They tried to break you, but they only made us stronger." And somewhere in the dark, beyond the fences and broken boards, someone watched, unseen. Because not everyone was done trying. The morning after the attack, the farm felt different. Not broken, but alert. Like a body that had been wounded and now waited, tense, for another blow. Leland barely slept. He walked the fence line at sunrise, checking every board, every post, as Maverick followed him slowly from inside the paddock, still stiff from the injuries but refusing to be left behind. Dylan sat on the back of the truck bed, phone in hand, reading messages pouring in from across the county. The story had spread beyond their small town. A local radio station picked it up. Someone from the regional paper wanted to do an interview. Animal rescue groups were asking if Maverick needed to be rehomed for safety. Dylan scrolled silently, then looked at his father. "You know they're right," he said. "Someone could try again. Next time they might not fail." Leland looked out at the fields, jaw tight. "So what do we do? Lock him away? Turn him into a symbol behind a fence?" Martha, who had come to check on them, stood beside the barn and listened. "Maybe it's not about locking him away," she said. "Maybe it's about letting him go where he can be more than just a survivor. Maybe that's what he's here for." It wasn't what Leland wanted to hear. Not after everything. But in his heart he knew. Maverick had outgrown the pain. He had outgrown the farm. What started as rescue had become something bigger, a story people needed to see, to feel, to believe in again. Later that day, Dylan made the call to a sanctuary in northern Texas. A place with open pastures, security, and a team that understood what animals like Maverick meant to people. They didn't just care for broken creatures, they helped rebuild lives through them. "He won't be alone," Dylan told his father. "They use horses like him for therapy. Veterans, kids with trauma, people who don't know how to talk about pain, they talk through animals. That's what Mom would've wanted." Leland didn't answer right away. That night, he walked out to the paddock, where Maverick stood under a full moon. The bandages were gone, the wounds healing, but the eyes, those same steady eyes, met his with something deeper. Gratitude. Understanding. "You came here to fix me," Leland whispered. "And now it's time for you to do that for someone else." In the silence that followed, Maverick took a step forward, and gently rested his head against Leland's chest. The day Maverick left was colder than expected. Not the kind of cold that bites the skin, but the kind that lingers in the chest. Leland stood in the driveway as the transport trailer pulled in, clean and white with the words Whispering Pines Sanctuary painted across the side. The handlers approached with quiet voices and calm hands, but it was Leland who led Maverick into the trailer. No rope, no command, just trust. Dylan watched in silence, arms folded, a lump in his throat he didn't bother to hide. The air between father and son had changed, not because they'd solved everything, but because they'd shared something real. Grief, growth, grace. As Maverick stepped into the trailer, he turned his head once, eyes meeting Leland's for the final time. Not in goodbye, but in thank you. Martha placed a small photo inside the trailer before it closed, a picture of June, standing beside the old barn, smiling with sunlight in her hair. "So he remembers where he came from," she said softly. Leland nodded, eyes misted. "She would have loved this." "No," Martha replied. "She would have understood this." As the truck disappeared down the road, the farm felt both emptier and lighter. Leland stood for a long time, hands on his hips, staring at the gravel that had once held the weight of a broken horse and a broken man. But now the gravel was clean, the barn rebuilt, the fences standing, and the man still healing, but no longer hiding. In the weeks that followed, Maverick's story reached further than anyone imagined. Photos, letters, donations poured into the sanctuary. Veterans wrote in, saying they saw themselves in his eyes. Parents sent thank you notes for the peace he brought their children. Maverick became more than just a horse. He became a symbol, not of strength in size, but strength in spirit. Quiet, patient, unshakable. One evening, Leland sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in one hand and a letter in the other. A thank you note from a woman whose son had spoken his first words in months after meeting Maverick. Dylan joined him, no words needed. Above them, the sky burned orange, just like the day it all began. And as the wind moved through the fields, brushing the grass like fingers across memory, Leland whispered to the horizon, "You were never just saving him. He was saving all of us."